So I've heard a lot of people say that they would love to try an orchid, but they're afraid of them. They must be delicate and fragile. And I've even seen and heard seasoned YouTube plant people say they're intimidated by orchids. So join me with a tasty beverage of your choice close to hand while we learn about being brave with orchids. And before we get underway, a couple of things. First of all, thank you to everyone who took the time to respond to last week's question. You guys make me laugh. It's so neat to wake up the next morning, to come to the computer and sit down and start reading through all your comments. Some of you people are as sick and twisted as I am, and I love that about you, so thank you. First up is a bit of a happy story. A few months ago, I purchased a Hoya mengtzeensis. And I've got a picture of it, what it looked like when it first arrived over here. And it did well for a bit, and then the leaves started dropping. And I got very concerned and disappointed. And I couldn't tell if it was a watering thing, which it shouldn't be. It was in self-watering, so that reduces the chances. Or if it was just having trouble settling into its new home. And finally, all the leaves fell off, and I was left with something like this. But I thought, maybe it was mites, maybe it wasn't the plant itself, maybe there was something else going on. So I treated it for mites, and because the stem was still green, this one, I didn't give up on it. And I put it off by itself, isolated it, and kept on taking care of it. And this week I noticed that there are new leaves coming in and some new shoots. And I have some pictures, close-ups I'll put over here as well, which made me feel really good because even Miro had struggled with his. So, I didn't feel as bad when I struggled with mine, but to have mine coming back like this is really cool. So yeah, we'll keep you posted on this. And this was Hoya mengtzeensis. And the other little bit of news regards the seeds and my ill-behaved plant. So I collected the seeds and I looked for something to propagate them in, something that would just solve a lot of issues for me. And I found these. These are for cupcakes. So they look like that. They come over and they snap shut. So I thought I don't have to worry about the top falling off. It's one piece, it's lightweight, it's clear, light goes through. Should be everything that a young seed would like. And it appears that it is because I put some substrate in the bottom, not much, and I put a seed in each one. I poked a couple little holes in the top for ventilation. I did some in pon and I did some in organic. 4 of the ones in pon have started to sprout, and I've got pictures for over here, close-ups. So yeah, so I'm very excited about that. It happened very quickly. I think I potted these up or put them in this setup 1, 2, 3, 4 days ago. So yeah, that's really cool. I'll keep you posted about these two. This is a great experiment. Yeah, we'll see what happens. And I'm going to start off by saying that I am not an orchid expert. I'm not even a Hoya expert, but Hoyas are the plants that I work at. Orchids are the plants I have fun with. So, so I'm not the person to come to for all the answers. I can tell you what works for me and what doesn't work for me. If you're looking for the person that has a lot of the answers, that's Miss Orchid Girl. She's so sweet. She's so easy to watch. Her programs are full of information. So yeah, if you find out that orchids are something you like, or if you have orchids and want to delve a little bit deeper, yes, she's the one to watch. There are 25,000, so 25,000 recognized species of Hoyas, of orchids in the world. Botanists estimate that there are a total of some 35,000 out there, so there's quite a few more yet to be discovered. In general, orchids are hardy and easy and present you with no problems. They typically come in three forms: epiphytic, meaning they grow in or on trees or other things; terrestrial, which means they grow in the earth; and hemiepiphytic, which means they may start in the earth and transition to the sides of things, or they grow in a combination thereof. The ones you're going to be running into, and the one I'm going to suggest that you start with, is an epiphytic orchid. So if you can grow Hoyas and Ripsalis and other epiphytes, you can grow orchids. Be not afraid. So for the purposes of this video, I decided that I would do what I'm going to suggest you do, and that is go out and get yourself an orchid. I picked this one because I don't have anything like it, and I thought the blooms were really pretty. You can find orchids like this, and this is a Phalaenopsis, a moth orchid, sometimes called. You can find them at big box stores. You can find them at grocery stores. I've seen them in gas stations. They're everywhere, particularly this time of year with Valentine's Day coming up. So look through and find one you like. Pick a pattern that appeals to you, a color that appeals to you. Don't buy one of the blue ones because they're either dyed or spray painted and it won't bloom like that again. But find a nice looking orchid that you think is cool, that you'd like to have in your house, and get that one. They usually come in a big clear plastic sleeve, so you won't always get to inspect them too carefully. But take a look around. The roots that you are able to see should look fairly healthy. There's gonna be some dried out old roots on the top. That's the way it's gonna be. Don't worry about that. But take a look. If you can see if the substrate is moist, but you may not be able to do that. You probably also won't be able to lift it out of the container to take a look at the roots. It'll just be a pain in the butt inside the plastic and in the store and everything else. Chances are, if the leaves look decent, the plant's gonna be fine. So pick one you like. Look for one that has minimal leaf damage, or preferably no leaf damage, that has either all its buds open or there are still some buds yet to open. That's a good sign. If you can find one that has multiple spikes, bloom spikes, then that's great too, but primarily get one you like. Take it to the counter, pay for it, and take it home. when you get it home, carefully remove the clear plastic wrapper and take the opportunity to lift it out of its cover pot and take a look at the roots. Ideally, you want to see something that looks like that with either healthy green roots or green silver or silver green roots. If the roots aren't bright green, then it may need a little bit of a drink. But use this opportunity to stick your finger in there, feel around in the substrate, and see what it feels like. And if it needs a drink, give it a good drink. Water through all the way. Give it a good drink, and then let it drip. Don't put it back into your cover pot right away. Let it drip. You don't want a puddle of liquid in the bottom of your cover pot. Now, your orchid is going to be able to put up with a lot of abuse. As a matter of fact, this one, when I took the tag off and looked at the back, it even says this: survives neglect. And that's from the grower. So don't be panicky about it. When you lift your orchid out, don't be shocked or upset by the substrate that you see. I have purchased orchids that when I got them home were growing in chunks of styrofoam, which will work, but it's not a really good idea. It was chunks of styrofoam. They put some moss on top to cover that up so you wouldn't notice until you had it home. So don't be shocked by what it's growing in. Just as long as it looks healthy and good, you're doing fine. So find yourself a nice location. Orchids like a good, bright, well-lit area. They can take a little bit of direct sun. Most of my orchids are in my bedroom because it's cooler in there, because it's always cool in my bedroom. But they're in a west-facing window in the winter. In the summer, they go to a different location. But in the winter, it's just the right amount of light for them, and they do pretty well. Now, if you've decided that you don't like the pot that came with your orchid, you're not going to do anything about it now. Don't repot or do anything dramatic with your orchid while it's in bloom or while it's pushing out a bloom spike. It's not the best for the orchid. You're not going to get happy results, so don't do that. But find yourself a good location, someplace where you can see it and enjoy the blooms, because they're going to be with you for a while, and carry on. So you got your plant home. How do you take care of it once you've given it a first watering that it may need? All right, watering. Don't use ice cubes, even if it comes with a tag that says just add ice. Don't use ice cubes for two, very good reasons. Number one, orchids did not evolve to deal with ice water. And, how would you feel with someone pouring ice water on your feet? Don't do it. It's not a good idea. Second reason is, when you place 1 or 2 ice cubes on the top of the pot, that water is going to drip straight down, for the most part, straight down. It's not going to soak the substrate. And that's what you need to do when you water, is soak the substrate. So the ice cube thing, while it's a great marketing tool, and I know some people who've used ice cubes for a while, but it didn't work in the long term. So yeah, don't do that. Lift it out of the cover pot, flow through water, wait a couple seconds, flow through again. And work with that. Check your substrate. Once you get it home, at first, check the substrate in about 5 days. See if it's moist or dry. See how it's doing. Pull it out and look at it. Look at the roots. Look at the condition of the bark. And if it's not bark, don't panic. I've had success with plants, orchids, that were potted up in styrofoam chunks. There's a little bit of sphagnum on top for decoration, and the rest of it was styrofoam. And once it got blooming, stopped blooming, I took care of that, and it did fine. I don't recommend it, but it did okay. So check and see. My orchids typically get watered weekly. Right now, it's January here in southern New England. The house is a little dry. The bark tends to dry out very quickly. And a plant this size will take longer to dry out than a plant this size. So if you get a miniature phalaenopsis, check it after about 5 days. You'll find out what the schedule is, how often your plant needs to be watered. I have a lot of orchids, so I tend to take them all into the shower and give them a good hose down. Don't water the blooms, but I give them a spritz, a good spray. I wait a couple moments if there's any parts of the substrate that have become hydrophobic, I give it a chance to moisten them and rehydrate a bit, and then I give them a second spray. Let them drip, and I put them back where they live most of the time. So you're gonna have to figure out what works for you, but you can do that. While your phalaenopsis is blooming, it probably wouldn't hurt to fertilize it. You can buy any typical over-the-counter orchid fertilizer and just follow the directions on the back. It's that easy. I've used the blue stuff that you dissolve in water and pour over the roots. I've used the foliar spray. Both seem to work really well. If you use the foliar spray, you use it on the leaves and the roots, but not on any part of the growing, of the blooming part. So not on the spike and not on the flowers. But any roots you see or any leaves, you can give it a misting of that foliar spray. You can even make your own. It's that miraculous product, only really, really watered down. I think Fern has a recipe for it on her channel. So that's all you need to do to feed them. After they've finished blooming, after the last blossom has finally fallen off, then it's time to trim back the spike. Now, I have gotten lazy and left the spike on, and as long as the spike stays green, it's still alive. And it bloomed again from that spike, but not really very well. And it wasn't really very full, and the flowers weren't as big. So what I do is I clip the spike off as close to the base of the plant as you possibly can. If it's not got blooms on it, that spike is still taking system resources, and they're better spent in putting out a new leaf. And typically, it will put out 2 new leaves after blooming is done. If you've decided that you want to repot your plant, then now that you've done blooming, now's the time to do it. There are 3 options for what you're going to put them in, and I'm going to go get them for you. Now, those 3 options involve vented what I call vented containers. The first one is plastic. The second one is terracotta. And the third one is ceramic. They all have their advantages and disadvantages. These are really cheap. They've already got vents in them, and your orchid wants to be in a vented pot. It needs the airflow around the roots. These have a certain mass to them, so that when you put your orchid in and it blooms, it doesn't get top heavy. There's enough weight in this pot to keep that plant stable. These look really pretty, but there's a major disadvantage to these types of pots. Orchids tend to do this, and that's perfectly normal. The plant is happy and healthy. It's what orchids do. And if you can't handle this kind of like randomness, you might have some difficulty with orchids, but this is going to happen. With a pot like this, two things. This one narrows at the top, so it's difficult to get something out of it. We've all learned that the hard way. And those roots will come out through all these holes, which means that the next time you want to up-pot your orchid, you're going to have to cut all those roots off. And even then, there's still bits of root in all these holes. It was a horrible struggle. There were roots wrapped around here. There were roots wrapped everywhere. The plant was healthy, but it had absolutely outgrown this. And I just sat, and there's nothing else to do but cut off all the roots that were hanging out. Now, it survived, but it was not a pretty process. So if you see these in the plant store on the shelves and you think that's really neat, it is, and you can take it home, put a candle in it. Don't put an orchid in it. Even to put it in a plastic pot and use it as a cover pot, you're going to have the same problem with these kind of vented pots. The roots will find these slots. I guarantee you they will find these slots. But you don't need it coming through these and these. So, now, as I've shown you, I have orchids in terracotta. They do okay. The terracotta itself can absorb and hold a certain amount of moisture, which the plant can utilize. This one I've had over here, I mean, the roots glom onto every bit of this terracotta because it's got moisture, and it can draw the moisture from that terracotta. Just use a good mix in it, and you can do fine. But expect that you're going to get that kind of stuff, you know? It's fine. It's going to happen. Plastic is my preferred solution. It's cheap. I don't seem to get as many roots growing through the sides, and it's fairly easy to up-pot. Plus, it's got holes in the bottom, it's got holes in the sides, it's everything it wants. You can put this in a nice cover pot, like the one I bought. This doesn't have vents in the sides, but it's got a lot of holes in the bottom, as you can see, which is all important. So that's why I prefer to work with this. That just works for me, but use whatever works for you. It's not this one. Don't do this. If you do, at some point in the future, you'll go, he was right. Use a mix that you make. Most of the orchid mixes I've seen in the stores that I've used when I first started growing orchids have potting soil in them. which is not what you want. Use a mix that contains a combination of, I like bark, and even sometimes the orchid bark you find in the big box stores has potting soil in it. So, not a good thing. Bark, pumice, because I'm steering away from perlite. So bark, pumice, tree fern fiber, long fiber sphagnum, cocoa husk chunks, all those kind of things. Don't put soil in the mix. I know it's tough sometimes to not put soil in it, but don't. It's not what the plant wants, and it's just not going to work for you that way. When you plant your orchid, do not try and plant it upright in the middle. They don't grow like that. They grow at an angle so that any moisture that gets caught in the center can drain out. So they would typically grow on the side of a tree like this. So moisture doesn't get trapped in there. So don't, I did, it didn't work. So don't try and plant it, nice and upright. Let it be at its angle. You probably don't have to repot. You don't have to repot every year. Probably every 2 years, maybe. But you have to look at the substrate and see what it's doing. If it's still kind of chunky and airy, then you're good to go. If it looks like it's broken down a little bit, or the sphagnum has gone a little wild and spread, it might be time to repot it. Easy as that. Nothing difficult. The next thing you need to do is wait. Typically, orchid blooms last for a very long time, at least the Phalaenopsis. That's the ones we're talking about now, Phalaenopsis blooms. You don't know when the plant started blooming when you buy it for the first time. It could have been in bloom for a couple months. It could have been in bloom for a couple weeks. It's like what Grandma said when we were at a wedding and we asked Grandma when the couple was going to have their baby. And Grandma said, well, second one takes 9 months. First one can come at any time. And that's kind of the story with these. Typically, my plants that are established and going, they start to spike in January. The Phalaenopsis, that's what we're talking about now. The Phalaenopsis orchids start to spike in January. And what triggers the spiking is cooler temperatures. So if they bloom for you, you've done really well. My blooms usually last until May or June, sometimes even the beginning of July. I've trimmed them back. They've been growing right along. They've done well. The leaves look good and glossy and green, a little bit of texture on them. It's all been happy. And they've come in for the winter. I've got them in a good sunny location for the winter. And I water them, I take care of them. I've not been neglectful, even though according to the tag, they will survive neglect. Then in December, end of November maybe, you can put them in a cooler location. Not frigid, not cold, but just cooler. Mine winter in my bedroom, which is probably the coolest room in the house. Well, I think so, but it's 4 to 5 degrees cooler than the rest of the house on average. And in the evening, when the temperature of the house goes down, it gets, I was going to say chilly, but not chilly. It's cooler in there. It's the change in temperature that triggers the blooms. So put them in there, leave them go for a few weeks, and you should start seeing the spikes. When you start seeing the spikes is the time to pull out those stakes you saved. put the stake in, pointy end down, there you go. Put the stake in near where the spike is coming out and gently work it in. You don't want to try and spear the roots, but you're going to work it in so it's stable. And as the spike starts to grow, train it up the stake. Left to their own devices, the spikes will go out and it will become a very horizontal plant, which is very pretty, but I don't have that kind of space. It's very difficult to train the spike after it's gotten to a certain length. They get fairly rigid, so start training it early on. That's why you save these. And let it go. My Phalaenopsis, as I said, typically bloom in February, and the blooms can run on till July. They're not going to bloom all year round. And if you find some miracle cure or miracle powder or special video on YouTube that tells you how to get your orchids to bloom year round, don't buy it, okay? Don't go for it. They need their cycle. So just let them go, enjoy them, and just wait until they come around again. You don't need to repot every year. Not all orchids are Phalaenopsis, and some of the different varieties are going to require slightly different care. But on the whole, I've just had so much fun. They are so easy for me. You don't need special cabinets or enclosures or any of that stuff for most of the orchids you'll find. Whether you've got, like this is a little hybrid that's getting ready to bloom, which is kind of cool. That should happen in the next week or two. Or like my, stand up straight. Or like my monster zygopetalum. And this one does in fact bloom several times a year, but that's this particular species. You're going to learn that orchids are just easy. There's no need to be afraid of them. There's no need to be intimidated by them. You can grow these. And the best part about Phalaenopsis is that you only have to ever buy one or two. Now I figured it out. I have purchased, in my years of growing orchids, a couple decades now, I have only ever purchased 4. And all 4 of them are still here, still alive. But I have 11 of them because a neighbor said, "Oh, you get them to rebloom for you? Mine never do. Here," and she gave me 3. So I actually cleaned one up, repotted it, told her how to take care of it, and gave it back to her. And now it blooms every year for her. And she told a friend of hers. And her friend showed up with 4 and said, "Here, they never rebloom for me." I think she had unreal expectations about when they would bloom. And that may have been her cause for disappointment, but sure. So that's the best part. People will give you their orchids that don't rebloom. That's very, well, the thrifty part of me really appreciates that. So yeah, you need to go out and get you a Phalaenopsis. Question for the comments for this week is, Do you have any orchids? I've noticed from comments, from other questions, people have commented that they have orchids, they enjoy them. Do you have them? And if you don't, have you tried them? That would be interesting. Hoyas and Ripsalis and Epiphyllum, they're all epiphytes, including if you have Carapegia, is that string of hearts, is that what it's called? If you have string of hearts, they're also epiphytes. So if you can grow one of those, you should be able to grow the others. So let me know in the comments below, do you have any orchids? Maybe even mention what kind. And if you don't, would you consider getting one? Tell me about your orchids. And as always, I want to thank you for choosing to spend a little bit of time with me this week's end. Please remember to click the thumbs up like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell. They're all really important to helping my channel grow. If you've seen some products on here that may be of interest to you, most of them are available through my Amazon storefront, and there's a link in the description. There's also a link in the description to Miss Orchid Girl, and I'll put in a link in the description to Fern's page too. If you'd like to support the channel, there's a link in the description, everything's in the description I guess, to my Buy Me a Coffee page, or there's a thanks button down here that YouTube manages for me, and those contributions are definitely appreciated. I'm going to post links to a couple more videos. Is it over here? I'm going to figure this out one day. Yeah, it's over here. And enjoy the rest of your week's end.